Hogstye.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Hogstye. You are fortunate enough to not have Alex this time. This is Steve Thomas. Alex has abandoned us for other life things, unfortunately. But we have Dave, of course. How are you, Dave?
Oh, fantastic. How about yourself?
I'm doing fine, man. What has gone on in your world since last week that is exciting? Tell me something
Well, let's
exciting.
let's see. I spent the last half of my 50th birthday yesterday helping my wife take care of a client's dog that was alone. Had to set up a ordeal with a thing called Rover so they can come pick up the dog and watch the dog and all that good stuff. So I did that last night. I mean, not super exciting, but I mean, it was
That's not what
kind
I
of
was
a
looking for. What I was looking for is like there was a fight on your street. You know, you bought a new Lamborghini.
Well, see,
You hang glided.
unfortunately, where I live, I'm kind of tucked away off the street, so I'm away from all that kind of action you're talking about with that. I have to actually walk and go find it for
I
how
mean,
I'm
because it is
located.
Philadelphia,
I'm in the suburbs of Philly. I'm called what they call Delco.
Yeah, but you're still
So
in like the immediate stink of
yes,
the city of hate, though. That's the problem. Yeah, you
yes.
can't just like hit. There's not like a wall. It's kind of like a radiation zone where it just gets slowly better as you get away from it. That's the way I've always thought of Philadelphia. It's like here's the heart of it. This is what you can't live in the heart of it, but if you get away, it gets better. But you're still subjected to nastiness. That's the way I see it.
Well, I mean, I've grown up here. I've been here in terms of any other place in the world. I mean, is Philadelphia really that much worse than any place else, really, considering the fact of what you see in some of these other cities and
Yes,
stuff like that?
yes, it
I don't,
is.
I don't think so. I mean, I mean, we got great cheesesteaks here. I mean, hey,
I,
we're kind
I
of
mean,
nestled
look,
away pretty well.
everybody has character flaw. I don't, but most other people have character flaws, and you just need to accept that that's yours. You have this, this bias towards Philadelphia, and I have tried to educate you
Oh no, oh
over
no, oh
years.
no, oh no. We embrace those flaws. There's a little thing called having that Delco mentality. When you would understand if you were in the area long enough to understand that we're very hardened, you know thick-skinned people around here on the most part, except for some of the younger generations. Now we can't help that. They're a lost cause.
Yes,
But
they
like
are.
but like my generation, not much affects us at all.
See,
Like,
I had another attorney in Philadelphia I had to talk to, and I know him a little bit, and I said sorry to hear about Philadelphia. Right when he answered the phone, and he went, "What are you talking about?" And there's nothing. I just said, just generally, I'm sorry about Philadelphia. And he understood what I mean. He knew he knew. So some of y'all aren't
I think
delusional.
I think the biggest problem that people have in this city, especially the fans, is that they get too hung up on some of the stereotypes that are circling around Philadelphia, and instead of some of them just kind of taking accountability for some of them actions, they go, well, look at what Cleveland did with throwing all them bottles. If you go to L.A., you might get shanked. All this stuff instead of just owning what you have. I've always owned what our city was. I've never had a problem with that. It's like, well, we are who we are. It's our staple. I mean, I can't run from it. It is what it is.
Buy into the hate. Just accept it.
Just accept
This
it.
is us. In some
Yes.
weird perverse way, I respect that.
So,
You can admit it, you own up to it, and
hey,
you kind of live it. I sort of understand that.
hey, you know what? The Delco area in Philadelphia, and plus having two older brothers, made me the person I am today. I don't have all that inner hate that most fans have because I'm not an Eagle fan. I'm a Washington fan, and I went from having the glory years into mass depression and the dark ages, and it was like everything happened so fast. I had no time for inner anger. It just went right to darkness and
I don't
depression.
know if you've ever said on the air how it is that a native Philadelphia resident became a Washington fan.
No, I have not. And
You
the
don't want to?
child, I can. And,
Let's hear it. How
yeah.
did this happen?
Okay, so as I was coming into really learning football in the early 80s, and picking up the Delco Times, our paper around here, going to the sports section, because the Redskins were the rivals. They were a hot team. They were one of the best teams in the league, everything. So they were posted everywhere in the back sporting pages. So I read them. And I grew up at a time where my one brother is a diehard Phillies fan. I had no choice being a Phillies fan, but he was an Eagle fan, no doubt. But he liked other teams. I was a kind of guy where I took that same mentality. I started liking other teams. But the only thing is when I started reading more about the Redskins, started learning more about the Redskins, I was learning more about the Eagles organization under Norman Brayman and how bad the organization was, how poorly it was run, and here was a foreshadowing to Dan Snyder from me to begin with, if you think about it, unfortunately.
Yeah, the
But
tables have turned.
yeah, right. So it got to a point where I just started rooting for him more. And, when they drafted Darrell Green, I really liked him coming out of college because I was really into college football too. I really enjoyed watching college football, and it just got to a point to where it's like whatever little Eagle stuff I had, I walked up to my parents and I gave it to them. I said, I don't need this anymore. And then I got a Redskins starter jacket for Christmas that year. My parents helped feed that. And my oldest brother hated every aspect, but he was away in the Navy. So whenever he would sit there and say, I can't stand that you're a Redskins fan, I said, well, you should have beaten some sense into me then. That was your fault, not mine. And it's like I acquired good taste being a Redskins fan. I refused to take on the sour milk. But hey, and then lo and behold, how the tables have turned.
We've
Now,
descended back into darkness.
yes.
It's funny we say descend back into darkness because that kind of fits neatly along pretty well with Washington's battle, and I lose that term loosely, with the Chicago Bears last week, which
Oh,
did not go
man.
well. And I will say that I originally predicted a loss in my very first um, season preview, and then I changed my mind and said narrow win, and we all predicted a win.
Right.
I'm sure there were people that predicted a loss out there. I don't think there's really anybody who predicted a Bears blowout necessarily. And just to give you the scope of the blowout before we get started into the game, let's read some stats because I'm always into the stats. So here we go. Sam Howell, 37 for 51, 388 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, quarterback rating of 99.1. Yes, you heard that right. That's 51 pass attempts. There were 10 total rushes, including 6 by Brian Robinson for 10 yards. That's 1.7 yards per carry. Logan Thomas was leading receiver, 9 for 77 and a touchdown. Curtis Samuel, 6 for 65 and a touchdown. Antonio Gibson, 4 for 64. Terry McLaurin, 4 for 49. Ryan Robinson, 4 for 33. It goes down from there. 1 fumble, 1 lost. That was Logan Thomas. Thanks. Cody Barton was leading tackler somehow, 8 total tackles. The sacks were Jonathan Allen, Montez Sweat 1, Chase Young half. And do we play the Trustway? There's no point in playing the Trustway game. He was 2 punts for 103 yards. So that is Washington stats. And on the Bears side, Justin Fields, 15 for 29, 282 yards, 4 touchdowns, quarterback rating 125.3. Khalil Herbert, 10 for 76, which is 7.6 yards per carry. Justin Fields, 5.2 yards per carry at 57 yards. And that's the Bears. So just let's start off like this. I want to start with Washington's offense. Just give me your thoughts as to what you saw in Washington's offense this week against the Bears. We'll save the defense here for coming up.
Let's see. Offensively, early on, they just, you know, obviously they weren't able to run the ball against a defense that was susceptible to the run, which just blew my mind. I mean, they just had nothing, and it wasn't like they had running lanes either. There was nothing there. Every time Brian Robinson got the ball in his chest, he had defenders right around him. And I will say that the 5 sacks that Hal had, it wasn't all in that offensive line either. He started having moments of Going through his progressions, almost like he has to hit every single one before he makes a decision. And there were a couple times he rolled out of a clean pocket. He really didn't have to go anywhere. But probably the most frustrating part on offense is that they never had an opportunity to establish any rhythm whatsoever. And even when they had opportunities to actually establish anything, they either had a bad drop, Hal missed a pass that he should have probably have had, or what. It was like the offense just didn't show up. It's not like the enemy didn't call a bad game plan. The execution on the most part just wasn't there. And the only part of the enemy that I didn't like, and you alluded to the article, is that he went away from the run way too soon. I mean, he
Yeah.
should. He should have, and he's a former running back. That's what kills you.
Yeah, he's Dave's talking about the takeaways column that was Monday, and you can check that out. And then Dave's column is always Burgundy and Gold Reaction. That was out on Tuesday. Check that out too. Yeah, so it's a bit of a chicken and the egg kind of argument, a little bit in terms of is coach responsible as a player or the player responsible. I don't disagree with anything you said. I think Sam Howell looks, I don't know, a bit mechanical. Maybe is the way to say it, and because he's gone from he doesn't read the field very well to making a conscious effort to read the entire field, and that kind of backfires too because there needs to be a bit of a balance, in there that just naturally you can just kind of do it and quickly, and he's not there. He's not there because I agree. It was not all those sacks were on the offensive line. They didn't play well. Don't get me wrong, and it was still the Bears for God's sakes. But
right.
But yeah, I think Howell did cause a couple of those sacks for sure. Yeah, my biggest complaint about the offense was what you said, which was Eric Bieniemy, uh, 51 call. Actually, it was Sam. Howell had what, four? Let me just go back here real fast. Howell had four scrambles, so 55 called pass plays. And I realized they were losing this game, but how do you establish a rhythm? Well, start with running game, and at some point they just needed a drive that worked.
Right.
A drive that matriculated down the field, got some points, and even if it took a lot of time, when you're way down, um, I don't like that aspect of his game because I do think that there's some talent at the running back position. He's like chronically underusing it, I think.
Yeah.
So that's to me, that's a big problem with Eric Bieniemy. Let me ask you, I mean, you're the one that writes these Burgundy and Gold reaction columns. I mean, are the fans all in on Eric Bieniemy still? Is he like the savior?
I think they like his coaching style. They like how he's very meticulous and he's detail oriented, and he does things as a coach that we haven't really seen here in a while. But there are fans that do kind of get frustrated with him abandoning a run as quick as he did. But it was almost kind of expected. He did that in KC to a point. I mean, but I don't think he did it to this degree, to this level, because well, I mean, I think he's had like maybe one game all year where he had a balanced first half, and that
Yeah,
was
it's been
against
one game.
Philadelphia.
It was a Philadelphia game.
Yeah, and outside of that, he's been pretty much out of balance most. And I don't know if that has anything to do with maybe he doesn't have the confidence in his running backs, or maybe he's overvaluing what his receiving core is right now. And maybe he just sees all that talent and just wants to get the ball out there, almost using it as an extension to his running game. I guess maybe I'm not sure, but even with the receivers, McLaurin alluded to it a couple weeks ago, and they're still having struggles doing this on hitting, getting into the open zones where they're supposed to come out of their patterns and sit and give Hal opportunities to throw the ball. That's all predicated in the offense and that Bieniemy runs. It's not just simply coming in, doing a button hook and just sitting there. When you come back, you're coming back and you're looking down and you're reading where the safeties are or linebackers and you're sitting in that zone, and Bieniemy is supposed to read that with you. So when he sees something there, he can anticipate that throw. Well, and that's what's led to a couple of his interceptions this year because he's anticipating a throw for a receiver being in an area that they're not. So Even
I
though he's had his fair share of bad reads too on throwing passes, but it's been kind of that mix all around.
Okay, I have some numbers for you for everybody. Just lest anybody thinks that I'm making too big a deal out of this. Here's the numbers. So Washington has had a total of 102 rushing attempts this year. That is 30th in the NFL, meaning third from the bottom. The only two teams below them are Seattle with 99 and the Minnesota Vikings with 91. Now, simultaneously, Washington has been averaging 4.5 yards per carry, which is 10th in the NFL. Now, contrast that with pass attempts. They have had 191 pass attempts, and that is the fifth most in the NFL. Simultaneously to that, the quarterback rating, which is only how he's the only one that's played, 86, which is 20th in the NFL. So you tell me what is efficient here. You tell me how this offense should run. The statistics would tell you that they are a moderately successful. And no, it wasn't certainly in the limited amount of runs they had. In Brian Robinson was terrible in 6 carries. I don't disagree with your opinion. That he was smothered. I'm not disagreeing with all that. But what I'm saying is, this team is more successful on the ground than they are in the air.
Right.
And yet they are one of the 3 least running teams in the league. I do not understand that. I think that is a flaw in Eric Bieniemy's play calling.
I agree. And outside of the Bears game, it's the offensive line has actually been a pretty good run blocking line. They've been giving holes an opportunity. It's only just recently the last couple of games you've seen Robinson having a better feel in terms of holes opening up outside that he can bounce outside into, and he's getting these larger runs on. Well, he's getting more bigger runs more often than not now, and he's also a volume guy. If you Now, granted, they were down 27-3 by the end of the first half, right? Yeah, they were down 27-3 by the end of the first half. So it wasn't. I mean, the running game was completely taken away from them anyway. But in that first quarter, they only down 10-0. They had 2 possessions in that first quarter, and they just got to keep working the ball and get the rock to Brian Robinson Jr. It just doesn't. I don't know. It wasn't a great game plan against a defense that you should have been able to run against. And I don't understand how a line that's been pretty decent on run blocking this year get completely eaten up by that defensive front by Chicago, which is another thing that baffled me.
Yeah, I have thoughts. I don't want to save them because I think that leads into a larger discussion that we're going to have here. So let's anything else on the offense that we want to hit here? I mean, I think from my perspective, I mean, the receivers have talent. We know they have some talent. They do pretty well when they get a chance. But I mean, like anybody, if you just are so heavily dependent on a pass, I mean, it's not going to go well at some point. I mean, unless you're the greatest show on turf, Rams, which
Right.
Washington certainly is not. You have to have a varied game plan, and so I think that's part of what, in kind of a general terms, I think that's part of what hurts the success of Washington's offense. Let's see, what else on offense do we need to?
Well, you can also add when Rivera he went for it on 4th and 2. I believe this was in the third quarter. He went for it on 4th and 2, and they were already down by 2 possessions, 2 scores. And if he kicks a field goal, he's down by 2 scores still, no matter what. So 4th and 2, inside the 5. I believe they're inside the 5 or just outside the 10, whichever. He decides to go for the field goal, which makes no sense because even if you don't go for it, or even if you don't make it on 4th and 2, you're still down by 2 possessions, the same 2 possessions that you're down if you kick a field goal. But at least if you don't make it, you pin them deep inside your territory, and something could potentially happen defensively. And in the second half, the defense started playing a little bit better in the third quarter, and parts in the third quarter was the only areas of the game that they actually played fairly well. So it was like, what are you doing? I'm screaming, what are you doing? You got to go for it. Even analytics tells you got to go for it. It's just.
And I think, are you talking about the missed field goal play on that drive?
Yes. I think it
Yeah.
was a missed field. Was it a missed field? Yes, I believe
That
so.
was
Yes.
that was a missed 46-yard field goal.
Yes.
At that point it was 30-20. Yeah. So that a field goal would have put them within a touchdown. I think you're talking about.
No, I'm thinking earlier in the game. I think when they were down, it was I think it was before their last field goal when they were sitting at, what was it?
Well, the other one before that was it was 27-11 and they kicked the field goal. That must be the play you're talking about then.
I think so. Yes.
Okay.
Right there.
Yeah, I'm not one to be too big on analytics in football, because I do think that to some extent a coach has to have a feel for the game, But in the case you're talking about, they were down 16, and after the field goal they're down 13, which is 2 touchdowns.
Yeah.
So I sort of understand, I think, where you're coming from with that.
And especially when they weren't doing anything offensively, that was one of their better offensive drives they had to get to that point.
At that point, I personally, I might have just kicked the field goal myself, but I do understand your point. I'm conservative though, so I kind of understand your point. And then, again, that leads to kind of a larger, that's certainly not Riverboat Ron of years ago. Put that way.
Right. He hasn't been Riverboat Ron at all this year.
No, he hasn't. Because there were times in this game you kind of wondered, would he show some Riverboat and 10-10 season? He never did. Never did. Before we get to the coach part, let's flip over to the defense, because I think there's probably a lot to say about the defense in this game. So let's give us your overall thoughts on defense, and we can focus.
I think Chase Young actually played pretty well. He had a lot of pressures. I think he had 7 pressures in that game, even with his half sack. He was actually pretty disruptive coming in. Chase Young looks like I'm going to watch him over the next couple of weeks, but it looks like he's kind of turning into another gear because he's actually using a little more of his skill set to get to the quarterback than he has in the past. But I don't want to overreact to that yet, so I'm kind of watching him over the next couple of games. It looks like he might be kind of knocking on that door to kind of maybe flip the page a little bit, but we'll see. We'll see what happens during the course of the year. But I'll tell you what, man, that secondary was brutal. And Cody Barton, again, proves he should not be a starting linebacker, at least on this team, if not at all. If anything, not even in the league. It was just a complete embarrassment on defense. And I can't tell you how many times, pressure was coming in on Justin Fields, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching. There's absolutely nobody in the middle of that defense. He has the opportunity to run, or he has the opportunity of just dump it off to either DJ Moore coming across or Cole Kmet coming across. There's just nothing there. We downgraded from Cole Holcomb, which I didn't think was possible, but we did.
How do you downgrade from average?
We did. I would say it's right now. Cole Holcomb right now would look like a grade A player right now compared to Barton in this defense right now. And
the days when you could get a C instead of an F.
Man, no kidding. It's just crazy. And I do agree. I don't want to pile on Emmanuel Forbes like you said in the article. He didn't have a good game. But that was just the whole secondary, though. It wasn't just Emmanuel Forbes.
Well, that's why I said that. It was
right.
Exactly. Let's start where it's right here, because Emmanuel Forbes didn't play well, and he's not been good so far. It's too early to call him a bust. It's also not too early to say he's leaning that direction, perhaps. But none of them played well. I could not believe watching Kendall Fuller jump a route on the side, on an out pattern with no safety, no zone help over the top at all. If you miss that, it's a touchdown. What are you doing? That one boggled my mind. It really did. And I think all of them have been not there. The safeties have been particularly bad. They were particularly bad in this game. They were out of place on multiple occasions um, this week. I don't think you can just blame the corners. You cannot just blame Emmanuel Forbes. If you do, you're being very short-sighted because the entire secondary has looked awful. Looked awful in this game. They've looked awful in other games. How many times has their zone play been off? How many
Right.
times has the safety not been in position? Maybe I don't know this. I didn't go back and watch it. Maybe Kendall Fuller did expect a safety help behind him. I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me too much at this point. You know,
Well, well, they've been playing a lot of man coverage this
yeah,
year. Where last year they were playing almost strictly zone last year.
exclusively zone practically.
And what kills me is because I don't know a whole lot of Forbes and what he played in college, but kind of reading the room a bit, what people were saying, Forbes. I mean, although he could play man, he's the most effective in his zone. Playing in his zone, it's just another one of those situations like a Josh Norman. You're getting this guy that could play one role, but you're playing him in a different role. And right now when you're putting Forbes man against guys like AJ Brown last week and DJ Moore this week, I mean, you're just asking for problems. You're asking to destroy the confidence of this young corner. Is what you're doing because when you play man, you don't have a lot of backside help. You usually have a lot of single high type safeties in that zone right there, and there it's just you're not getting that what they call it, what basically a bracket coverage like you would in the zone. You don't typically get that. So I
Uh,
don't know.
yeah. I mean, what can you say? I mean, you're right. Um, all of those were factors into a terrible game, but I also cannot just idly stand by and ignore the fact that the interior defensive line, looked awful. Awful, I thought, themselves. This is a game in which somebody named Khalil Herbert averaged 7.5 yards a carry, more than 7.5 yards a carry. And I believe he got hurt. Did he not get hurt? Uh,
Yeah, for his ankle, yeah.
yeah. But there were gaping holes in the middle, and it wasn't all. You can't put it all on Cody Barton. Okay. I mean, Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne, and for that matter, Sweat and Young, did none of them played well against the run. And I don't know. I mean, they're supposed to be the strength of the team, and they were not there this week. And so I put significant amount of blame on what happened with them. And by the way, newsflash: the Bears aren't a great running team. They're not a great
No,
offense. Period. The
no.
idea that they let um, the Chicago Bears average more than 5.5 yards a carry as a team. Justin Fields, 5.2 yards per carry. Rashawn Johnson, 3 carries, 19 yards. That's 6.3 yards per attempt. I mean, those guys looked like, um, I mean, they look like John Riggins out there. You know,
Well,
I
see, the one problem, that I was kind of directed into because reading what other people had to say about when you look at San Francisco and some of these other teams is that they have like Pittsburgh. I mean, Pittsburgh's a great example. Pittsburgh, they don't have any real true elite defensive linemen, but they have one stud dog of a pass rusher, and he affects everything on that defensive front right there in TJ Watt. It's the same thing as San Francisco. I mean, San Francisco, don't get me wrong, they have a very good defensive line, but they have a dog in Nick Bosa. They have a guy who is a game changer, and everybody else in that line plays a role and they have specific assignments within that role. Here, we're expecting four guys, we're expecting four dogs, four superstars, and then all we end up getting is half the time is freelancing from the edges And we don't have that. We don't have that Nick Bosa. We don't have that TJ Watt. We don't have a guy that could sit there and just take the game in his hands and completely affect it defensively. We don't have that. We just have a bunch of above average good. I mean, you could probably call 'em borderline almost blue chip type prospects on that line, and that's fine. But you don't have that game changer. We don't have it. And then when you have a linebacking core back there that has no impact whatsoever, that just trickles right down to the secondary, and the whole defense suffers because of it. And we're seeing it this year.
Yep, yes, that's exactly right. So in this game in particular, more than others, because there have been other games this season in which the defensive line has played pretty well, and I agree. I mean, there's not a game changer back there. I mean, Deron Payne has looked like he was about to go down that road a couple times this year.
Right.
I think, but certainly, I mean, Montez Sweat is a good pass rusher,
Yeah.
but he's not a game changer. Chase Young has been better, but is he a game changer? Absolutely not. John Allen has been strangely silent in several games this year. He certainly was invisible in this Bears game. Both of them
Right.
were. And that has a trickle down effect. I mean, if you have linebackers that are better, if your game changer is a middle linebacker, and there are some in the NFL, that matters. But obviously, I mean, Washington doesn't have any linebackers on the roster this year. Essentially, they're invisible. So, yes, but all that having been said, though, the secondary, that does not excuse the secondary from continually blowing coverage, continually get beat man in man coverage, the safeties being out of place, Kendall Fuller making a dumb decision to jump a route, which cost him a touchdown. None of that is the fault of the front four.
Right.
And this leads us really to the larger question here, which I want to get to before we move on to the Atlanta Falcons. And that is, what is the responsibility of the coaching staff for this debacle specifically, but generally speaking, the very hit or miss performance? And let's start with the obvious, which is Ron Rivera. He's gotten a lot of criticism this week. There's people calling for his head already, and I mean, that's not going to help anything right now, kids.
Right.
You're not going to replace a head coach in week 6 and expect that to do anything, but I understand the frustration. So, how much blame does Ron Rivera have in this game in particular? And what do you think about his performance this season generally?
Well, I'm going to start with this real quick because I know you and I have gone back and forth in debate with this, and in terms of accountability, players need to execute, or the coach staff needs to get these players in the right positions to succeed. Ultimately, it has to be players that have to execute. And you've been on that horse for the first couple of years under Rivera. Last year we had a couple of conversations, but now we're in year 4. We're in year 4, and you're putting up a sign in a locker room, which I saw today that he put up there saying, "Do your job." You have to put a sign up that says, "Do your job." And then you're not talking to the guys at halftime. You are letting them talk amongst themselves. In year 4, I'm sorry, but now it goes from players need to execute to, why do you still have guys on your roster that aren't executing anymore? You're continuing to run a roster out there of guys that aren't doing their job, quote unquote, guys that need to execute, quote unquote, which is right. They have to execute, but if they're not executing,
What are they
and you
doing on the
still
field?
exactly. So now it falls on Ron. This is you now. Now you need to take full accountability for this because you have not made significant enough changes or moves to get these guys to get in a position where they need to be. And part of that is maybe you got to bench one of these star players to make to put a message out there, but you haven't done that. Now it falls on, it's a little less on player execution and a lot more of you not doing your job as a coach. And you saw that in the Chicago game. They went in there ill prepared. They weren't ready to play the worst team in the league. They were uninspiring against the worst team in the league. And you had another sellout begging the fans to come back. The fans came back. We were loud again. The noise we were getting ruckus. We were screaming defense when defense was out there to distract, all that. We were doing all of that. And here you are, 40-20. You want us to come back, we came back, and now you give us no reason to continue coming back. I got news for you. That next home game against Philly is going to be a sea of green,
Oh,
and
it is.
you deserve it. Now I'm going to be sitting amongst a bunch of Eagle fans. I don't deserve that, but
You need to
unfortunately,
be home.
I
You
have.
deserve not to be with people from Philadelphia.
But the point, Ron, is you have this team ill prepared. You're being out coached every game now, and you're sitting on the sidelines emotionless half the time. I mean, it's. I mean, they were having camera angles. From what I understand, there were camera angles taken on him where he's just standing there, doing. There's no emotion on his face. No one really around him, and he's not like getting into anyone's face to kind of get him moving. I
Yeah, I
mean,
was kind of shocked that he admitted that he let them talk amongst themselves at halftime. I mean, what kind of coach does that? You don't
right.
necessarily have to have an Al Pacino halftime speech necessarily. There's a fine line because that's just TV. What was the name of that movie? I can't for life of
And
me remember.
any given Sunday.
There, thank you. Any given Sunday, yeah. But the coach has to go in there and do his job and motivate people. That is, a key part of what the coach does. But listen, I never thought Ron Rivera was a particularly good coach. Never did. His offenses, Carolina had a league MVP quarterback behind it, who
Hmm.
was unbelievable in his prime, had size, had running ability, had a huge arm, wasn't that accurate, wasn't good in the short game, but Cam Newton was a game changer. And you saw that all the way back at Auburn. And there's a lot to be said for that. But the offenses were never anything special. The defenses were good, but not special, I would say. And he came here and is doing less. And he's been a bad, the Ron the GM is certainly worse than Ron the coach, I think, for the most part, and that doesn't help. So yeah, I was amazed. And yes, I am a person that does typically err on the side of player execution, but I do think in this particular game against the Bears, to quote you, they were uninspired, they were unmotivated, didn't look like they wanted to be there. They woke up for about a quarter in the second half,
Right.
and then it didn't go well and they died again, basically. And I missed the last like 3 minutes of that game, the last field goal or whatever it was. But it looked like more of the same on there. My illegal stream died at one point, so I missed the end. So yeah, I do blame Ron for that. Um, I don't think that there's any point in firing a coach in week 6. What on earth? And we've already talked about Eric Bieniemy. I don't know if he's going to make anything. Nobody's going to make anything better in the middle of the season. If you're going to replace him after the season. I think.
The only benefit I could possibly see is that maybe Josh Harris just wants to see what he has in Bieniemy, not necessarily in terms of wins losses because he's not going to do much to change that through the rest of the year, but just seeing how he can get the team prepared getting into the games. If they come to every game more prepared, better game plans, more energy, and because that's all
Wouldn't
that is
Jack
what
Del
they
Rio
lack right
be your
now.
coach though? Jack Del Rio is the guy who's been the head coach. Been head coach. Eric Bieniemy hasn't.
That's true, but the only problem with Jack Del Rio is, I mean, he's been so bad at his positional aspect of his job. I mean, it's. I even wonder sometimes that he's even kind of lost the defense sometimes from time to time, and if he lost the defense, I mean, what makes you think the rest of the team is going to really respond to him? The team respects Eric Bieniemy. Every time you hear people talk about Eric Bieniemy, nothing but high regards, this, that, everything else. Jack Del
Except
Rio,
his
oh yeah, he's a good
offenses are
coach.
extremely inconsistent and haven't performed in several
Sure,
games.
sure,
They haven't
but
put together a complete game all year.
no, they haven't. Absolutely not. That's the most frustrating part. Year 4 for Ron Rivera, and you still can't do that. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to sit here and bash Ron Rivera either, because I mean, as a human being, as a great human being, and I think what he went through when he came here with Dan Snyder, most people wouldn't have been able to handle. And what he did, how he survived that, out, especially that season. That granted, that first season they were what 7-9 when they won the division, so it wasn't like they ran
It was
roughshod
one
through
of
the
the worst
division.
divisions in NFL history.
Right.
I did saw a statistical analysis of it.
Yeah.
It's maybe the worst.
But in that time where he was battling his own issues with cancer, dealing with the toxicity of Dan Snyder, he still kept the team together. They went in that playoff game against Tampa Bay and they showed up. They showed up with Taylor Heineke, and we actually thought they had a chance to win that game. I'm going to. I mean, there's a lot of good things you can say about Ron Rivera, the person. There's a lot of great things you could say how he held that locker room together and the culture he kept there with that toxic owner there and everything. But you got to set all that aside. We're talking about football now. As a football, I agree with you 100%. He hasn't been. He's not a great coach. He's barely average. You take this couple years away from Carolina, he's got a sub 500 record.
Yep, you take into account that got Cam Newton,
Yeah,
the league MVP in the draft. Yeah, I agree.
and Khalil Hudson.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
not Khalil Hudson. Oh, jeez.
You're talking about the tight end.
No,
Or the
I'm talking
linebacker.
their linebacker. Yeah.
He had a Hall of Fame linebacker out there.
Yeah, Luke
Yeah.
Kuechly. Luke
Yeah.
Kuechly.
Khalil
I
Hudson
called him
will not
Khalil
be in the Hall of Fame.
No, he will not.
um, yeah, all of that. And I mean, as far as Jack Del Rio goes, the defense should be better than it is. On the whole, they have not performed well, this year. And as kind of a macro level point, yeah, I think you do kind of have to point the finger at Jack Del Rio. I mean, at what point is the secondary going to stop playing so badly? You can't. I don't know how much blame he should get for the lack of linebackers. I blame him somewhat. Did he speak up and was told to sit down and shut up? And
Right.
Off-season scouting maybe. I don't know, but I do blame him somewhat for that because he consented to that arrangement.
Now,
But
do you think he runs a bit of an antiquated scheme though? As like, do you think his scheme matches or can match up against what the NFL style offenses are today?
well, what's he doing that's so antiquated?
Um, as far as I mean, I think he plays more of a style of, attacking the quarterback when he can. Only he doesn't blitz, very often with terms of that fifth or sixth rusher.
They shouldn't have
Which,
to blitz too much, though.
well, see, that's the thing though. You're dealing with in a league where you have a lot of mobile quarterbacks. You have a lot more read options that are now more prevalent in these offenses and everything. And if you can't be disruptive in that backfield more times than not, and if you're only rushing four and there's four can't get there, I mean, the options for these quarterbacks are, especially with like guys like Justin Fields, they're gonna run all over you. It's I don't know because I don't get much into in depth on what he runs and X's and O's wise, but it was something that I saw. I believe it was either Brian Mitchell or Doc Walker had alluded to that, and I was kind of curious on that. And I know you kind of dive more into the X's and O's on that than I do, so I was curious of what you saw on that.
Well, I mean, no, I don't think he does blitz a lot necessarily. And I think what they're trying to do is rely on the front four to get pressure. And I'll give you a stat here just so we can have some context. Their blitz percentage is 26.9, which puts them flat, almost exactly dead in the middle of the league. So they're not, like the Minnesota Vikings are the number one at 56.2 for context. The Kansas City Chiefs 36.2, they're number 5. And then the least blitzing team is the Colts at 14.7. Arizona 19.3. So they're literally dead in the middle. So they're blitzing some, but not a ton. And I think what the general overall philosophy is pressure with the front four and let the secondary and the linebackers defend the defensive backfield. Now the flaw in that is the linebackers are horrible and the defensive secondary just flat out hadn't worked.
Right.
So I mean, I don't know what else. Yes, I mean, could he design some more exotic blitz schemes? Maybe, but other than James Smith-Williams, who's your versatile defensive lineman that's going to do that? Who's your linebacker that could blitz a lot? Yeah, they
Right.
maybe have a couple strong safety types who could maybe do that for sure. I don't totally disagree with the defensive philosophy. It's an execution problem and an unwillingness on the part of Del Rio to bench players in the secondary who deserve to be benched.
Right.
So I guess I'm saying I'm blaming both. I blame both he and the players for that. And yeah, I mean, at times, I don't think like Justin Fields is a quarterback you blitz, but I don't know if you blitz him too much because you don't want to over pursue a quarterback like that. Because, I got news flash. Once the end comes in and blitzes, then there's a running lane, and so mobile
Well,
quarterbacks can
see,
exploit that.
well, see. That's why like these solid defenses against those quarterbacks, whose ends are supposed to maintain a containment out there, and you're supposed to use. And again, it goes to linebackers mainly, which we don't really have much of. Are supposed to handle, coming up into those gaps, stunting in those gaps, whatever, moving in up and down the line, and then that's where you kind of bring in a safety or a corner and take them on that opposite side. On the usually all usually off the weak side, and you bring them back around in on that blitz right there. I see a lot of other defenses do that. The 49ers do that all the time. That's just something we don't do enough of. I don't think anyway.
Yeah. All right. We got to move on.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, game balls. Honestly, nobody deserves a game ball in this. Game. If I was going to give game balls, um, I mean, Justin Fields, 4 touchdowns, looked great, turned his team around, looked like a leader. So that's my offensive game ball, and I mean DJ Moore, both him, and I don't even have a. I mean, I would give Kendall Fuller a deflated game ball for his incredibly stupid decision to jump a route with nobody behind him. So there's my game
Right.
balls.
Oh, gee, for me, let's see. Actually, I'll give a game ball to Cosme because apparently he didn't let up a pressure or a sack all game. I saw someone post that, so I'll give it to Cosme. I
Okay,
mean,
fair enough.
there you go.
All right.
And defensive side, I'll just give a deflated game ball to. Why not Emmanuel Forbes? Got to be honest.
He's gonna have a collection of them. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let's preview what we can of the Atlanta Falcons. And honestly, I mean, the Falcons aren't a particularly good team themselves. They are a fair to Midland team. That having been said, they did beat the Houston Texans, last week in a game I did watch. They don't look like a decent running team, but they have some abilities to run, and their quarterback is maybe better than you might think. So, but I think the game more comes down to Desmond Ridder. I'm talking about. I think the game more comes down to whether Washington can show up and play full 4 quarters or not. More than anything.
Right.
Thoughts?
No, yeah, I agree. I think, I mean, there isn't anything that Atlanta does exceptionally well. I mean, it could be any given week where Bijan Robinson, their rookie running back, really kind of just really explodes. This could be that week. Who knows? Why not, right? But they do have some talent with like Drake London and Kyle Pitts out there. So I mean, Desmond Ritter's going to have his opportunities in the passing game, and if we can't, but their offensive line is pretty good. Our offensive line doesn't allow a lot of pressure on Desmond Ritter, so if they can contain our defensive front fairly well, like Chicago did on the most part. I mean, they have the weapons. Bijan Robinson coming out of the backfield with Kyle Pitts and Drake London as their pass catchers out there. They just got done trading for Van Jefferson, who's a nice little receiver, compliment receiver. I mean, to be honest with you, this should be a game that Washington should win, but this is also a game where it reminds me a lot of Chicago all over again.
Well, yeah. I mean, Drake London has talent. He made
Yes.
some unbelievable catches last week. And Kyle Pitts, what is Washington's biggest weakness? Linebackers. What
Mm-hmm.
is Kyle Pitts? A tight end, and an
Yep.
athletic tight end at that. So I mean, I think that is the
In fa-
the the principal matchup to watch this week. Jamin Davis versus Kyle Pitts.
And the scary part too is right now Kyle Pitts the last couple of weeks has been on the verge for that one big breakout game that Atlanta's been waiting for him to have. He hasn't really had it yet. He's kind of been on that verge, and this could be that game.
It could be. Yeah, it could
So,
be. And I mean, Desmond Ritter isn't much of a runner, but he does have a quality arm. If you give him time, I think the defensive game plan needs to be to blitz Desmond Ritter this time. I think you
yeah,
need to blitz him more. He's not a huge threat to run, so you don't need to worry about him escaping the pocket too much. Get him under pressure. Do not give him time to find those guys. Drake London's a big dude. He's going to win 50-50 balls out there.
right.
Kyle Pitts, very hyper athletic. That does not bode well. Bijan Robinson did not do well last week, particularly, but he has talent, and I think you're right. I mean, he could break out. That is a guy who, if you give him space, he will do well. So it's I, it's tough to. All of that having been said, if Washington could ever play a 4 solid quarters, they could overcome that. Because Atlanta is not that talented, okay? I mean,
No.
yeah, we got to talk about it, but they're 3-2. They beat the Texans on a last-minute field goal. Otherwise, they would have been 2-3, exactly like Washington. That game, for those who didn't watch it, came down to a field goal with no time on the clock.
Right.
21-19. They're not gonna. They shouldn't be able to run the score up. But you just don't know. I mean, I don't have a lot of faith that Washington's going to show up for this game. How do they react to getting blown out on national television, but to the worst team in the league? That is the key more than anything else. Mentally, can they throw last week away and say, you know what, we are better than that, and we're going to prove it? Or do they wring their hands, come out unmotivated again? That's the key to the game.
Right. And ultimately, I actually think that they're going to respond similar to what they did after that Buffalo game when they went into Philly and almost won that game. I think they're going to flip that same switch, but the only difference is Atlanta isn't Philly. So I think they do go into that game. I think Atlanta will keep the game close because of the weapons they have, but I think they will play a more complete game. I think they'll play for at least 2.5 quarters this time. So
2.5 quarters. It's
yeah.
normally just 2. You're suggesting we're going to make progress.
Well, Atlanta's not really all that great, so I think they're going to make a little bit of a stepping stone.
Listen, the Bears were less, and look what happened.
I will say, just to be fair, though, I think the Bears have more talent offensively than what the Falcons have, and I think Washington went in there expecting to just roll them, but the problem is the Bears weren't going in there with the intentions to be rolled. I mean, DJ Moore and Darnell Mooney are a really good pair of receivers. Atlanta doesn't have that. They had Drake London, and that's it. Now,
They have Drake London and Kyle Pitts, though.
But they have Kyle Pitts as a tight end. They don't take Kyle Pitts to the outside very often either. But so it's
who's going to cover Drake London though? Who can match up with him 1-on-1?
Well, that's the thing. It's like you said, you got to get in Ritter's face early and force him into making mistakes.
That's the key.
Yes.
Okay, game prediction for it. You want to say anything else about Atlanta?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Game prediction.
I'm going to say 24-21 Washington.
Washington?
Yeah.
This is a game I predicted Washington to win in the beginning. Man, I've been going back and forth for the entire hour about how this game is going to go. I do think, and people have accused me of being overly negative in this thing, and hey, you're supposed to be a fan. I got a newsflash. I've always been objective, and I'm probably more so now. But I'm going to go with a close Washington victory also because they have bounced back this year.
Yeah.
It's not like other years when they've just died immediately and it was over even in the first quarter of the season. They have bounced back, and Atlanta is not that good. Yes, there's issues to watch, and yes, it's on the road. But I do think you're going to maybe have a small victory. I'm not going to say 24-21, but I'm going to say 27-24. Atlanta.
Mm.
Okay. So
Atlanta? You picked Atlanta to win?
sorry, Washington.
Oh,
I'm going to
okay.
say 27
Okay.
24 Washington. And
Gotcha.
I'm reluctant about that. So, by the way, real quick, I saw a video of Josh Harris in the suite at the Chicago game, kind of laughing. I didn't realize that had become a thing amongst
Yes.
the fan base. What do you people? None of you guys understand business, okay? He's up there with business partners, and yeah, they care about the game, but he is not a diehard fan. He has to act like the billionaire owner businessman who is recruiting people to he works with. Okay,
Right.
that is how it works. Dan Snyder was a moron. Up there, and he didn't know how to be a businessman at all. What
Right.
Josh Harris is doing up there is exactly like every other owner, who good owner. That's my real quick view of it.
Right.
Any other thoughts?
Well, I mean, let's be real fair. I mean, the fans and the media that want to, or local media want to rip into him for, well, your team's being blown out in the game. I will guarantee you that 99.9% of you are all being hypocrites because during that game, I will guarantee you had it like I did when I was at the stadium. I was frustrated, yelling there pathetic and everything, and losing my voice and everything. I still had random conversations with people in that
Of course.
stadium, and we had exchanges to where we both laughed and smiled. I guess that makes me a pathetic fan. I mean, come
No,
on,
it
man.
makes you
We've
a
all had that
normal
moment.
makes you a
Normal
normal
human being.
human being.
Correct.
If
Yeah.
people who are that wrapped up in football, get a life.
Right.
If you are going to be angry and you got all these YouTube videos about people breaking televisions, you
Yeah.
people are morons.
Right.
That is not what it's about. And so Josh Harris, yeah, I'm sure he wasn't happy. But at the same
Right.
time, he has a job to do up there. He's not up there for giggles. He's up there with sponsors, with business partners,
And besides,
community leaders. He has to act like a reasonable business
yeah.
person up
And
there.
besides, what makes you think that someone didn't turn around and say, "Hey, listen, you think you're going to keep Ron Rivera past this year?" Maybe he turned around and just started laughing, and that's when the camera
Yeah, who
panned in.
knows? Maybe he
Who
told a funny
knows?
joke. I don't. Who
Yeah,
knows?
right.
Okay, real quick because we're running out of time here. We've got about 3 minutes left. You had an interaction with somebody who is both loved and hated by the Washington fan base, RG3. What was it, Dave?
That was he made a comment or he actually made a tweet about his top five uh, MVP candidates. Where he listed in order McCaffrey, Tyreek Hill, Tua Tagovailoa, Mahomes, and Josh Allen. And I just made a reply, and I was like, I have a Brock Purdy, good reason to remove Allen from that list. Just saying. And he goes, another game like Sun. And he replied to me saying, another game like Sunday, and he's in. I go, fair enough. And he asked me what my top five was. I was just like, I wasn't expecting that exchange. So he was really cool about it. Where I did come back and I say, well, McCaffrey, you can't really argue. I think he is number one spot. I do go with two. I push Mahomes up to three. I put Purdy on the back half of that five. I mean, he's just I don't care if it's the system or not. Hey, you got the players around you play, but you know what? He's playing in a system where he's looking a 100 times better than Garoppolo and 1,000 times better for a short little period of time for Trey Lance, and he's been phenomenal doing so. So he's playing in a system plopped into these other two guys. I mean, yeah, Garoppolo helped give him the Super Bowl, but I was off the back of that defense. That defense was phenomenal that year. So it was like, so you got to give Purdy his props. Where I gave T.J. Watt being number four, I don't think defensive players get their fair love on that. And he liked it. He says, I like it, not mad at it. I was like, interesting. So it was a nice fair exchange. So on that, Steve, who would you look as your top five MVP candidates right
Oh
now?
God.
Right on the
Um.
spot.
Yeah, I know. And I didn't have time to think about this either today. Okay, so let me look at the list here again. Um, to me, the obvious is Christian McCaffrey. That guy, dude, has been
Yeah,
unbelievable. There's
right.
no doubt in my mind he's been number one. And I don't necessarily think Patrick Mahomes has been great by his standards this season, but he's got to be in the discussion just because he's
Yeah,
Patrick Mahomes. I do not like Tua in the league. I'm not a huge Tua fan. Um, yes, he's had his moments, but I don't know. I would go McCaffrey, Mahomes, Josh Allen, I think, is in there, which RG3 had on his list.
Right.
And I'm going to go with you on Purdy. I mean, I think he's number 5. He's at the end, and I don't think he deserves to be the MVP, but I think he deserves some love
Yeah,
in it.
I do too. Yep.
That was only 4, wasn't it?
Right.
And I'll go with Watt I'll go with Watt at number 4 there, I guess. As you did, because you got to have a defensive player, and so I think he's probably the defensive leader in the clubhouse right now, probably. So, but
And
I think McCaffrey's the runaway leader for the
right.
award right now.
And I look at Watt. You gotta be fair. I mean, you take Watt off that defense, and I don't think Pittsburgh wins maybe one game, and that's it. I mean, Watt affected games this year. He was a game changer this year with what he did, and I'm just blown away by how good he is.
I have not heard a ton about Aaron Donald this year.
No, he's been fairly quiet, I believe.
Yeah.
When it seemed like, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think Christian McCaffrey's the leader in the clubhouse. But I listen, and we got to run here right at the end. But I think for those, I realize that a lot of people in Washington hate RG3 and all that. That aside, I mean, root for whoever you want to root for. I think he's a pretty darn good analyst.
Let me add something real quick because RG3 is quickly becoming one of my favorite analysts, a former player turned analyst. And when I said that, he actually liked that tweet too. I didn't even tag him in that. I just said it. But it could be, you watch Dante Whitner getting on national TV, saying that, Dak Prescott just sucks. You have LaShawn McCoy calling former players ass. Their ass on the field. I mean, you're having these players coming out here trying to be analysts, and all they're doing is just talking like, just like what's his face? Forget the reporter down there in Dallas, and I agree with him on it too. Is like these former players turn analysts, or just guys like in a bar room somewhere, just chatting it up and just yucking it up like any normal fan would be. It's like I don't tune in for that, And the one thing that RG3 does is he breaks down a player by their performance and numbers and stats and everything, and he doesn't think that everybody always plays well, but he backs that up with numbers. When a player plays well, he backs it up with numbers and the performance. These guys, these other former players, I mean, hey, get away, man. If I want those comments, I'll just go into work and sit at the coffee station and
They're just babbling. They're just kind of babbling off the top of your head.
That's all.
Off the top of your head.
Right.
Yeah. So I give RG3 a break. I mean, you can separate first of all, he had one of the best seasons for a Washington quarterback in team history, maybe the best, but it certainly went downhill from there. But if you can separate that in your feelings, I think he's a darn good analyst. He says some goofy stuff sometimes, but he's kind of a goofy dude, and we all have our quirks and whatever. So yeah, I kind of like him. Okay, so that is it for this episode of the Honk Style. I'd like to thank you, Dave. I'd like to thank Alex for not being here because we're certainly better off without him. Just kidding. But we will see you all in a week.
Yep. Take it easy.